Hey guys, it's Adam from Lucipixel and welcome back. Over the years, I have noticed this question come up during talk shows or interviews or documentaries that I've come to realize is probably one of the most important questions anybody can ask another professional. And that question is, what's one of the most important things you've ever learned? I remember a couple of years ago seeing a short interview with David Fincher, the director for Fight Club and a bunch of other amazing movies. And he was asked the question, what's one of the most important things you've ever learned as a director? And without hesitation, he looks at the camera with a bit of a coy smile on his face and says, everybody is a voyeur. And if you think about it, that pretty much defines the core of a lot of his movies. It's having the opportunity to be able to snoop into somebody else's life in a very candid way. His films are very candid as a result of it, and he understands the fact that candidness is very, very intriguing to other people. Think about when you were young and the first time you saw a dead rat on the street, half partially decomposed. Yeah, it's tragic and unfortunate for the rat and gross. It's also kind of fascinating at the same time, isn't it? Or if you were driving down the freeway and you see a car accident. Although you might be a very compassionate person who wishes the best on whoever might be inside that terrible twisted wreck, at the same time, there's this morbid curiosity on what might be inside that car. Which is the main reason why very often there's traffic jams when there's car accidents. It's not because people are avoiding flaming vehicles, at least not usually. It's usually because people are stopping to have a peek. It's not because we're evil. It's because we're voyeurs. We're curious about humanity and all of that entails. I also remember a few years ago I was listening to one of Feng Zhu's podcasts and he was asked that same question. What's one of the most important things you've ever learned as an artist? And again, without hesitation, he answers, everything is shapes. And I'm sure to many of his listeners who are a little bit more novice, they might have thought, okay, well that sounds pretty obvious, subjectively speaking, right? But as a more trained artist, as I have evolved and grown and gained experience myself as an artist, I came to understand that more profoundly. I came to understand that shapes is really ultimately everything that we see. We don't see faces, we don't see noses, we don't see eyes or trees or cars or clouds. Not objectively. Objectively, we see shapes. And it's in the mastery of those shapes that we start to master art. And we start to be able to see things more effectively. So, I want to redirect this question to me. Even though nobody's technically asked me this question, I'm going to answer it anyways. But I'm going to answer it in the context of building your career as an artist. Because growing up, I was only really presented with one option. And that was to build your skills, prepare a portfolio, and a killing, professionally written, concise CV, and start knocking on doors, making cold calls. And this is before the days of the internet, where the only job ads you'd get were either through word of mouth or in the newspaper, in the classified section. That evolved quickly, but that was the case. And then when the internet came into the whole game, it was a lot of wasted space and wasted time, where they would have websites that had, drop in kind of fill out this form and hit send type of things, almost like an Amazon shopping cart type of idea, which was very impersonal and very ineffective. And then slowly that evolved into more personalized things like LinkedIn and where we are today, essentially. But all of those options, career-wise, all allude to the same thing. They allude to building a portfolio, making a CV, sending it off to somebody, and then playing the waiting game. And, if you throw enough lures in the ocean, eventually somebody will grab, but sometimes it's after a few weeks, sometimes it's after a few months, sometimes it's after a few years, long after you've forgotten that place even existed, and you've moved on to other things. And, despite that long wait, you don't always catch a big fish. More often than not, you catch measly little fish that'll barely sustain you for a day or two. But that's what you got. And I lived with this reality. Not only that, but I lived with the reality of having to work locally, at least back in the day, if we go back a decade or so ago, because most studios were pretty paranoid about hiring external work, hiring people freelance, working online. Studios nowadays are a lot more comfortable with that concept, but back in the day, they didn't want to take any chances, in fears that their work, their IP, their intellectual property might get leaked out to the public. Now, there's not so much paranoia. So we're a little safer, and there are far more options for us to work from home. But it's still the waiting game. It's writing up a CV, preparing a portfolio, tailoring it, if possible, for this particular studio that you want to work for, and sending it off, and then hoping for the best. And in a time of financial poverty and desperation, you sit there at home and wait for a couple of weeks, trying to think of the optimal time to send a follow-up letter to find out if anybody actually received it. And when they ever do reply, they might reply with, "We'll let you know, it takes time," or "We've decided to pass on your candidacy this time," and then, well, you're back to square one again. And this was my reality. And every now and then I would get a job, and very often I would grab the job that I needed to grab because, well, I had bills to pay. And very often these jobs did not really contribute to the big picture of where I wanted my career to go. They were filler jobs, many of which I've never mentioned on my channel because, well, they were very inconsequential jobs that I wasn't particularly excited about, I wasn't proud of, and they didn't contribute anything to the big picture. I'll give just one such example would be I worked on a CD-ROM game for Dora the Explorer in Flash. It was a garbage job. I hated it. I liked my colleagues. They were fun to work with, but I hated the work. I hate Flash. I came from a classical animation background, and it was soul-sucking work. And I can't stand drawing that football-headed girl. I swear to God, I wanted to shoot somebody. I was so completely annoyed with the whole process. But hey, it paid my bills for a limited amount of time, and then eventually that job ended because it was about a 3-4 month job, and then, well, more bills showed up. And I had to find more work. And I kept on this back and forth, frustrating, sometimes great, sometimes terrible path, and kept finding myself back at square one, kept finding myself on the chopping block, kept finding myself on unemployment, kept finding myself looking for more work, kept finding myself discouraged. Despite having good and bad jobs, I still kept finding myself back at that square one position. And I started to realize something, that I'm only now hearing celebrities and actors and singers, famous people, start to express publicly now. And that's the fact that no matter how much fame and fortune, or at least fame, fortune might not necessarily follow fame, but how much fame you have is a finite thing. You look at an actor who's the talk of the town, who is on every talk show and was on every billboard and was a big hotshot, and then they disappear one day when their popularity or the popularity of that particular film or project or song that they worked on fades, as everything does, and then they're back looking for work again. And these world famous people are just as unemployed and just as uninteresting to the public as you and I. They're just back to being normal, ordinary people. And they go from the state of being extremely popular to being completely unknown. And it's this flip-flopping back and forth. And you hear celebrities. I remember watching, I think it's called Close Up. It's kind of like a round table of famous people. And there was Jim Carrey, and there was Sacha Baron Cohen, and a bunch of different comedians all kind of sitting around a table talking about their careers. And they expressed what a lot of people who experience popularity and fame express. They expressed it as, you see them when they come on stage, but you don't realize the jarring experience it is being a famous person standing up in front of a huge crowd of people when you've just spent the last 2 weeks completely alone. In your hotel, sitting on a stage, writing your lines, practicing your lines, rehearsing in your hotel room, being completely alone. And then all of a sudden you go from that to being in an auditorium with 500,000 people screaming. And then that's over. And then they're back to being alone again. You think that fame is all about parties and friendship and fun and drinking and booze and all kinds of stuff like that. And it's not very often. Very often it's a lot of waiting. Just like you and I are waiting right now, sitting here, waiting for me to get to the point, right? So there's got to be more to this. And I realized that in my career too, after big prestigious direction jobs, sitting down at dinner tables with executives and, being supervisor on big fancy titles for big fancy studios and doing all these really cool things and being at the front of the table, being the one on stage giving presentations and workshops and shit like that. And thinking to myself, despite all this, there's got to be more. Because I realized that this popularity is a very, very superficial thing. It's a show. And I felt that my life, my soul, needed to contribute more. Furthermore, I needed some kind of stability because I was sick and tired of flip-flopping back and forth between employment, unemployment, employment, unemployment, money, broke. I couldn't trust my finances with anything. I couldn't plan anything long term. And it was in these moments of utter desperation where I had nothing, literally nothing left in the bank, where I've described it in art talks in the past, where I literally was looking in my winter coat pocket in the middle of the summer, looking for 25 cents so I could run up to the store and buy myself a cigarette, because I was a smoker back in the time. And this was real life, man. And we're not talking about Adam in his teens. We're talking about Adam in his 20s. We're talking about Adam in his early 30s. I would find myself back in these very humiliating and frustrating positions. Friends would invite me out for lunch or whatever, and I'd say, no, sorry, I'm busy. Well, I wasn't busy. I was broke. I couldn't afford. And I wasn't going to mooch off of my friends. So I have a lot of empathy for people who find themselves in this position. My friends, my family, myself, I get that. But there was a certain point where I was so desperate and so broke and had really nothing to lose that I was forced into using a skill that I was very good at, that I put aside because I was taught not to value it. And that was my creativity. And in this moment of desperation, I thought to myself, well, I need work, I need money, and I'm a member of these different communities. And I remember my first ever business venture where I decided to take things into my own hands. I was in my 20s, I guess, or either late 20s or early 30s, I can't remember. Probably in my 20s. And I remember being a member of the swing and jive dance community, something I've spoken about in the past, and I had zero money, absolutely zero money in my pocket, and I, with no resources, got together with a friend of mine who worked in sound design, and he had all speakers and stuff like that, and I found a curling club with a really nice dance floor, because I had gone to a wedding reception for a friend of the family's, and I loved this. I remember being there and thinking to myself, oh my God, this would make for a great dance venue. And I remembered that location, and it was only a couple blocks away from where I lived. And I got in touch with them, and I booked the space. I did my own advertising. I got in touch with some of the other swing and jive dance schools in the city, asked them if they wanted to be a part of it. They were happy to be a part of it because I was a very passionate, active member of both of these communities. And within the space of a month, I built a website using very basic, crappy HTML that I knew at the time. I did my own art because, well, I'm an artist. I got some schools to participate to bring their students in and fill the place. And I got sound and speakers, and I DJ'd it myself. And lo and behold, I open up the doors and hundreds of people come walking in through the door. And I ended that night with more cash in my pocket than I knew what to do with. And I swear to God, listen to me, right now, I had nothing in my pocket. Zero. Zilch. Nothing. I was completely, utterly broke. And my unemployment had expired at that point. I had no more unemployment checks coming in at that point. So I hit the bottom of the barrel. And yet, within a 4-week period, as soon as I decided to take matters into my own hands and fashion my own thing, it was, compared to what I had experienced in the past, remarkably easy. There was one thorn in my side with regards to this project, though. There's a reason why this venture didn't last long term. It was because at a certain point, my community started to make requests of me. They wanted me to do certain things to accommodate them. But my heart wasn't enough in this community. As much as I loved it, it wasn't important enough to me long term to build and develop and invest into it further. I was an artist. I was a painter. I was a cartoonist. I was a fantasy illustrator. I didn't see myself being somebody. I didn't see myself being somebody running a dance venue for the next 50 years. So I had to make a choice. If I invest into this any further, if I put any more of my time or money or energy into this, then I'm making a long-term commitment that people are going to start to really depend on. And so many people had already depended on me at that point. So I decided to let it die off. And I kept it as one little 4 to 6 month venture, and then I let it fade. And it left an imprint on me, but I didn't quite learn the lesson at that point, because to me, a serious professional, I'm an artist, I decided to pursue art. And at that point I had found other work as an artist, and I continued working as an artist for different studios. And sure enough, it would last for a finite amount of time, and then eventually I was back on the streets looking for work again. And this pattern continued. And it continued and it continued for years to follow, until eventually the last studio job that I actually had was working for a really very reputable studio for a very reputable show as a supervisor. And this show required me to travel away from my family. So I had a very young son at the time. He was still a baby, still in diapers and stuff. And I had 3 kids, and I was put in the position of having to travel away from my family and only see them for a day and a half out of every week, which was really hard, because being away from my kids for a long time really is something that I have a hard time with. So it was really rough on me to do this. I made some amazing friendships and had some incredibly memorable experiences doing this, but I couldn't be away from my family for that long. It was tearing me apart. But the irony was, regardless of the fact that I traveled all the way down there to the studio, because that's what they demanded of me to do, all of my artists were freelancers. I didn't have a single artist on my team that I was supervising that worked in the studio. They all worked from home. Confided they worked from home within the area in case they needed to drive in or come in for meetings and stuff like that. They were all local, but they were all working from home. And I remember asking my supervisor, why am I working in the studio when all of my artists are working from home? And he answered, oh, it's just the way it is. It's the way we do things here. And I was like, okay. And this trend continued. And after that job had ended, and I, packed up all my stuff and officially moved all my things back home to Montreal. And I found myself back on that chopping block. I found myself looking for work once again. After all of those years of this pattern, I think once and for all, I had enough. I just didn't see myself continuing on this grueling, unpredictable, roller coaster, stressful pattern of on and off for much longer. And I decided at that point, I'm going to, once again, but officially, take matters into my own hands and take a chance with something that I was incredibly passionate about. And that was starting my own school. Because at that point, I had already started as a professional teacher. I'd already had my taste of being a teacher in the animation department in a college in Montreal. And I utterly fell in love with that type of work. I realized at that point that I was raised by a family of teachers in a world of teachers, and it was much more a part of me than I realized until I actually had a chance to experience it and realize it was the most rewarding experience of my entire life. I really realized how I was really designed for that kind of work. But at the same time, I was also very aware of and empathetic to the state of the world around me and the state of education in different countries like the US and across Europe and things like that, where only the truly wealthy and privileged could afford a proper education, a competitive education that got them those competitive jobs. And being a Canadian, I was somebody who could very easily take that reality for granted in others. Fortunately, I was very well connected to a lot of my artistic friends from around the world who expressed their frustration with these situations. And I could empathize with those frustrations and really build over the years a sense of true anger towards the exploitation of people who are at the foundation of their career and have no money. And in watching these big hotshot artists all talking about how they all were buddies and hung out at such and such a department at Cal Arts, and thinking to myself, that club, that exclusive VIP club with the velvet curtains that nobody else without the money could afford to be a part of. And I thought, that's not right. That's a way of keeping the rich richer and the poor poorer, and that's a system I've never agreed with. So you take that perfect combination of defeat and frustration, which leads to creativity and a, well, I've got nothing else to lose type of mentality, and mix that with anger and frustration. And what I didn't realize at that very crossroads in my life, I had discovered the ingredients for innovation. I discovered what it takes to design something on your own, to make your own reality, to create your own ecosystem. I realized that the modern image of career, the modern model for career that we're only discovering now because the internet is a very young thing, is you have the resources to create your own stability. You have the resources to create your own legacy. And when you realize that you can do all of this for pretty much nothing, you can build your own website, do your own promotions, and find your own client base or students or whatever it is that you wish to do. You can do all of that without paying a penny out of your pocket. And you can build more stability entirely on your own. Then all of a sudden, this pipe dream of making it into that big fancy studio fades very quickly. It loses its value and its importance. And it might, if you're anybody like me, you might get pretty pissed off at the idea that you've wasted so many years of your life being brainwashed into believing that that was the only way to make a name for yourself. Now, I don't want to be too emphatic in this because I could be very misleading in telling you that you don't need studio experience. You definitely do need studio experience. So in order to offer you the ingredients you need to be able to do this on your own, I want to paint a realistic picture on what you need to build a name for yourself and to build your own business. Number one, you need to be aware of the fact that it does not require you to pay a penny. If you put a little bit of effort into learning the tools on your own, a week's worth of learning some basic code to manipulate your own website, you have the artistic skill, and you need to be somebody who has learned the ropes of the industry. My school would not be what it is today. I would not have the stability in my business venture today if I was just somebody who walked off the street and said, yeah, I'm a teacher now. I can draw, I'm a teacher. No, it takes a lot more than that to be a teacher, at least if teaching was something that interested you. You need to have experience as a teacher. You need to have experience in the industry. So when people are asking you industry advice, that you can offer them practical advice and not lead them down some unrealistic route, that you know exactly what the industry is looking for. You keep up with the trends of the industry, that kind of idea. And that you're somebody that can say, I have developed my skill to a level that I can get hired. I've developed my skill to a point where I'm employable. So you need that kind of credibility. That's step number one. So eat a little crow, pay your dues, build your portfolio, make that first step. You can't just walk in off the street and expect things to work for you. So that's an important step number one. And in my opinion, that secret ingredient that made it all happen for me, the one that existed, the one that I finally had when it came to launching my school back in 2015, was frustration. It was anger. It was a bit of bitterness. I decided to launch that school because I had spent so many years as a teacher and as a professional intensely upset and frustrated with the state of the educational system worldwide. I walked into Lucid Pixel, my school, completely empty-handed, but with a very, very passionate desire for change. To change my life, to take control of my life again, to take control of my future, to no longer invest all of that timeless energy and effort and sacrifice and redefinition of who I was artistically to fit into some studio that may or may not bother to answer my phone call because they get about 16,000 applications a day and chances are I wouldn't get called. To be able to completely, utterly fashion my own ecosystem and invite into that ecosystem whoever wanted to be there. And to set a tone of inclusiveness and openness and affection and support and love for anybody who walked into those doors. And that vision has resonated to this day. Steve Jobs said it perfectly. There's an interview, you can see it online yourself. He was asked the question about how he innovated and how he designed, and he said, there's something you need to realize. Realize that every one of the greatest things, greatest achievements and greatest creations that you see out there, the greatest, tallest buildings and the most complicated computers and the most advanced technology have all been created by people who are no smarter than you. It was just created by people. And the bigger the project, the more people collaborated to create it. But none of them were smarter than you. Steve Jobs admitted to not being any smarter or any more capable than anybody on the planet. But he would look at something and get annoyed with it. He would look at a mouse and say, why the hell do I need to, what's with this stupid ball thing? I want to just be able to roll it on my jeans. And he redefined the mouse. He redefined screens. He redefined the phone. He just said, I want this, let's do it. And he realized that it doesn't take a genius to do it. It just takes the desire. It takes the need. Whenever you find yourself in a position in your life where you're sitting there bitter at life because something or somebody or some situation has handed you rotten apples, at that exact moment where you're sitting there looking at your life and thinking to yourself, I am so fed up with this shit. I want a little light bulb to light up in your brain, and that makes you realize, oh, wait a minute. That frustration means there's an opportunity. That frustration is always a result of a lack of something. It's always caused by a gap in the system. Something that's missing that needs to be replaced. Something that doesn't function properly that needs to be fixed. And if you're at a state in your life, if you're at a position in your life where you're feeling frustrated, it's because you contain the last, final, important ingredient to innovation. You're emotionally invested in it. If you want success from it, it has to be something that you are incredibly emotionally invested in. It has to matter to you on an emotional level. And to me, education, access, affordability of this education, the foundation of any artistic career, furthermore, access to honest feedback. Tell me what it is that you want and I'm going to show you how to get it. I didn't have access to that growing up. And to have access to that, that's what I desired. That's what I felt needed to be done. So I did it myself. But I had to pay my dues to get to that point, to get that experience. And I used that experience to give it to other people right away, so they don't have to waste 25 years of their life chasing after it. They understand what's needed right away. They can gain from that experience right away. And there are incredibly selfless, talented, generous artists out there that are starting to pop up with that same kind of experience, that same level of frustration, that same backing behind them, like Anthony Jones and Marc Brunet and Sinix and Clint Cearley and Tyler Edlin and Noah Bradley and all of these. Bobby Chu, there's an excellent example for somebody who dealt with frustration, built a legacy from difficulty. And look at how loved and how much he contributes. I have so much love and affection for that guy, for what he does. But he built that legacy on a lot of hardship. And he used that hardship as his catalyst, as his driving force to help others. And look at how much he helps others. And if you've ever been to a schoolism workshop, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You will never find a more inspiring experience in your life for an artist. I have been to 2 of them. They were hosted at the school I taught at. And I could not rush home fast enough. I could not run from that conference fast enough to get home and paint because I was so inspired. So many of my biggest aha moments as an artist came from attending those workshops. It was built on a legitimate, authentic human being, Bobby Chu. And he has that passion to keep driving him every day. He has that vision to keep building him every day. And he always knew. He's always been extremely clever at taking whatever crumb of success he finds and snowballing it into a mountain. He's brilliant at that. And if you ever need career advice, holy smokes, listen to that guy. He knows what he's talking about. When I look back at my career, I realized that it required the same amount of energy that it took for me to trudge through the snow every single day, day after day, knocking on studio doors, soliciting myself for work. But every time I make an effort nowadays, it all goes somewhere. I'm not throwing CVs off of a rooftop hoping that some artistic director picks it up out of the slush and reads it. Every effort I make has value because this is a world that I've fashioned for myself. Now, being self-employed isn't necessarily for everybody. Some people prefer to work in a studio where that structure is already established and they have a style of art that's very adaptable to different studios. They have a very compatible artistic style. In which case, I strongly recommend you pursue that because you have a set of skills that are highly in demand, and you've found a way of mastering it and marketing it in a way that makes it very repeatable. In which case, you are very well suited for that type of work. And you might very well be suited for independent work as well one day. But to those of you who don't fit in, to those outcasts, to those artists that don't necessarily have that style that everybody wants and everybody needs, I want you to realize something. The world has changed. That single linear monochromatic system of employment of go to school, get diploma, make CV, build portfolio, knock on door, that system is becoming very archaic. Studios are far more comfortable hiring freelance artists at a distance. I've worked for years at Fantasy Flight, never left the comfort of my own home. While I was teaching full time, I did it as a side job. This kind of stuff is very common nowadays. You send your CVs, you can connect directly to employers and spy on different artists and find out what kind of style studios are looking for just by snooping their LinkedIn profile. It's really freaking easy compared to the way it used to be. Understand that there are many more options out there, and that you might not be a perfect studio fit, but you might be an absolutely fantastic candidate for building a world around your own vision, your own energy, your own personality, and you choose who you invite into that ecosystem on your own. Open your eyes and realize that you don't have to go and knock on everybody's door. You do have to pay some dues. You're going to have to spend a couple of years and get frustrated and get the door slammed in your face and sit by the phone and wait for somebody to call you back just so you can get a little bit of a foot in the door. But once you got that, learn as much as you can and realize that you're not stuck living that type of lifestyle for the rest of your life. There are many other options out there. I want you to feel empowered today. I want you to feel like your opportunities just expanded after listening to today's talk. Because I don't want you to have to suffer the way I did or the way my friends have. I want you to be able to build a successful, fruitful career today and experience the stability and the popularity that you deserve so you can start to invest in yourself and you can invest in your life moving forward. All right? So, with that said, I hope you enjoyed today's talk, and of course, I send you all my love and happy painting. Take care.